The pretense was supposed to save her life. Just play the part, they said. Pretend to be his fated mate. Let him believe the soul mark burns when your skin meets his. And Tanith had agreed, because the alternative was death. She stood before the Alpha King of Valdrin now, her borrowed gown too fine for a servant, her borrowed name bitter on her tongue. The great hall was silent as a crypt. Every noble, every guard, every servant waited to witness the resonance. That sacred moment when true mates touched and their soul marks ignited with shared fire. Tanith's wrist bore only ink, a forgery, a lie. She was soulless. One of the cursed ones born without the ability to bond. In a world where mates were destiny, she was an aberration, and now she had to fake the one thing her body could never produce. Alpha King Lorcan stood before her, devastatingly beautiful and terrifyingly still. Silver hair fell across eyes the color of frozen storm clouds. They said he had executed the last woman who tried to deceive him. They said he could smell lies the way wolves smelled blood. His hand extended toward her. This was the moment. The exposure. The death. Tanith placed her trembling fingers in his. Nothing happened. No light. No warmth. No resonance. She waited for his roar of fury, for guards to seize her, for the executioner's blade. Instead, Lorcan smiled. Slow. Knowing. Dangerous. Perfect, he murmured, soft enough that only she could hear. You're exactly what I need. That night, he stopped pretending. And everything Tanith thought she knew about mates, about bonds, about this cold and terrifying king, shattered completely. The women had been arranged like offerings before an altar. 12 of them stood in the great hall of Valdrin, each one presented by noble families who swore she was the Alpha King's destined mate. Each one bore a soul mark on her inner wrist, that sacred brand identifying wolves capable of bonding. Each one believed she might be the one. Tanith stood at the end of the line. She was none of those things. 3 days ago she had been a kitchen servant in Lord Morcant's household. Invisible. Insignificant. Surviving on scraps and silence. Then Lord Morcant's true daughter, Bryony, the one actually prophesied to match the king, had vanished in the night. Fled with a soldier she loved, abandoning her family to ruin. You will take her place. Lord Morcant had cornered Tanith in the pantry, his breath sour with wine. Same build, same coloring, close enough. My lord, I have no soul mark, I'm soulless. Yes, I know what you are. His lip curled with disgust. But the tattoo artist has already been paid. You'll have a mark by morning. Convincing enough at a glance. Tanith had tried to run. Morcant's guards caught her before she reached the gates. Listen carefully, he'd hissed, fingers crushing her arm. You'll attend the selection. You'll pretend to be Bryony. The king has rejected every candidate for 3 years. He'll reject you too, and no one will look too closely at a failure. And if he chooses me? Morcant's smile had been a cruel, vicious thing. Then you fake the resonance. You play the devoted mate long enough for me to leverage the connection. And if he ever discovers the deception? He'd leaned close. I'll tell them you murdered my daughter and stole her identity. A soulless imposter. They'll burn you alive, and I'll light the pyre myself. So here she stood, wearing Bryony's silk, Bryony's sapphires, Bryony's name. The false soul mark on her wrist was still tender from the needle. It looked real enough, an intricate knot of black lines that supposedly represented her wolf's bonding signature. But it was dead ink. It would never ignite. Because Tanith was hollow, empty. Born without whatever spark allowed wolves to recognize their fated mates. In Valdrin, the soulless were considered cursed, defective. Most were abandoned at birth. Tanith had survived only because her mother had hidden her long enough to flee. She'd grown up as a servant, hiding her bare wrist beneath long sleeves, praying no one ever looked too closely. Now her survival depended on a different kind of hiding. The great doors groaned open. Silence crashed over the hall so completely that Tanith heard her own pulse roaring in her ears. Alpha King Lorcan entered. The first thing she noticed was the cold. Not a draft from the open doors, but something else entirely. A frost that seemed to emanate from his very presence, as though winter itself had taken the form of a man and learned to walk. The temperature in the hall dropped noticeably. Tanith saw her breath mist before her face. He was tall. Taller than any wolf she'd ever seen. Broad shoulders filled a black coat trimmed in silver fur. His hair was the color of fresh snow, falling past his jaw in waves that caught the torchlight like frozen silk. And his face. Beautiful was too gentle a word. His features were carved and cold, all sharp angles and pale skin. High cheekbones, a jaw that could have been cut from marble. But it was his eyes that made Tanith's wolf, small and stunted as it was, cower inside her. Pale gray, almost colorless, empty of warmth the way a glacier was empty of mercy. He moved down the center of the hall with predatory grace, and the nobles parted before him like water before a blade. No one met his gaze. No one dared. Whispers trembled through the crowd. "The frost is worse than last month. The curse is spreading. Look at his hands." Tanith looked. The king's hands were bare, and even from this distance she could see that his fingertips were tinged faintly blue. Not paint, not decoration. Ice. Growing beneath his skin. If he doesn't find his true mate soon, he'll freeze from the inside out. 3 years of selections, hundreds of candidates, none of them his match. Tanith's mind raced. A curse. The king was cursed, and apparently only his true mate could save him. Which meant he was desperate, which meant he would be looking very, very carefully at every woman presented to him tonight. Her stomach dropped. King Lorcan reached the first woman in line, a red-haired beauty with a mark on her wrist that pulsed faintly with inner light. Real. Alive. Everything Tanith's was not. The woman extended her arm with trembling eagerness. Lorcan took her hand. Nothing happened. The woman's soul mark flickered but did not ignite. No resonance. No bond. Lorcan released her without a word and moved on. Second woman. Third. Fourth. Each time he touched their marks. Each time, nothing. The pattern continued. Hope offered. Hope destroyed. Tanith watched the failures mount, and a desperate, foolish thought crept into her mind. He hasn't matched with anyone in 3 years. Hundreds of women with real soul marks, and none of them triggered his resonance. Perhaps he never would. Perhaps she could hide among the rejected. Just one more disappointment in an endless line of them. 5th. 6th. 7th. Closer now. She could see his face more clearly, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This was a man who had stopped hoping long ago. 8th. 9th. 10th. 2 women stood between Tanith and the king. Her palms were slick. Her pulse raced so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. The false mark on her wrist seemed to pulse with guilt, with accusation, with the certainty of her impending death. 11th woman. Lorcan touched her hand. Her soul mark flared briefly, brighter than any of the others, and Tanith saw hope blaze across the woman's face. But Lorcan's expression didn't change. Whatever he felt, whatever he was looking for, this wasn't it. He released her. The woman crumpled into tears. And then he was before Tanith. Up close, the cold radiating from him was nearly unbearable. She could see frost patterns forming on his collar, on the silver buttons of his coat. His breath misted in the air between them. Those pale eyes fixed on her face. "Your name," he said. His voice matched everything else about him. Deep and smooth, edged with frost. the kind of voice that could command armies or condemn prisoners to death with equal ease. Bryony, Tanith lied. Her voice didn't shake. Small mercy. Daughter of Lord Morcant. A flicker passed through those winter-gray eyes. Interest. Assessment. Something else she couldn't name. Your wrist. Tanith extended her arm, sleeve falling back to reveal the false mark. The ink was still slightly raised from the tattooing, but she prayed he wouldn't look that closely. He looked. For an endless moment, Lorcan simply stared at her soul mark. His brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, his head tilted. Then his fingers closed around her wrist. Ice. His touch was ice, genuine cold that burned against her skin. Tanith gasped before she could stop herself. How was he so cold? How was he still alive with a body temperature that low? And beyond that shock, the expected nothing. No resonance, no fire, no recognition. Just frozen fingers against her false mark and the thundering certainty that she was about to die. She waited for him to release her, to move on, to dismiss her as he'd dismissed all the others. He didn't. His thumb traced across the ink slowly, pressing down just enough to feel the raised edges of fresh tattooing. Edges that a true soul mark would never have. His eyes lifted to hers. Tanith saw it then. The flash of recognition. The knowing. He knows. Interesting, he murmured, voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. His mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but something far more unsettling. You're not what you're pretending to be, are you? Her chest tightened with fear. Neither am I, he whispered. Before Tanith could respond, before she could run, before she could do anything at all, Lorcan turned to face the hall. His grip on her wrist remained firm. I've made my choice, he announced, his voice ringing off the stone walls. This one. The great hall erupted into chaos. The carriage ride to the palace was silent. Tanith sat rigid on the velvet seat, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Across from her, Alpha King Lorcan lounged with deceptive casualness, one ankle crossed over his knee, watching her the way a cat watches a cornered mouse. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the selection hall. Hadn't explained why he'd chosen her. Hadn't called for guards to arrest her, despite clearly knowing her mark was false. The waiting was worse than any punishment. You're trembling, he observed finally. I'm cold. It wasn't entirely a lie. The frost that surrounded him had turned the carriage interior into a winter's night. Her breath fogged with every exhale. Are you? His tone carried amusement. Or are you waiting for me to announce your execution? Tanith's jaw clenched. If she was going to die anyway, she might as well stop cowering. She lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. Why didn't you expose me in the hall? Lorcan's pale eyes glittered. Expose you as what, exactly? You know what I am. Do I? The games were exhausting. Tanith's fear sharpened into something closer to frustration. My mark is fake. You felt the ink. You know it's a tattoo. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing the forgery. I'm soulless. I can't bond. I can't be anyone's mate, especially not yours. Her voice cracked slightly. So why am I in this carriage instead of a cell? Lorcan studied her for a long moment. The carriage jolted over a rut in the road, but neither of them looked away. Tell me, he said quietly, what do you know about my curse? The shift in topic caught her off guard. Only what the whispers say, that you'll freeze from the inside out unless you find your true mate. The whispers are partially correct. He lifted one hand, examining his own fingers. The blue tinge was more pronounced up close, spreading from his nails to his first knuckles. Ice crystals formed along his cuticles as she watched. My ancestor made a bargain with a winter witch, Lorcan continued, his voice flat with old resignation. Power beyond measure in exchange for a price, Every king of my line carries the frost in his blood. It sleeps while we're young, but once we reach maturity, it begins to grow. He flexed his fingers. The ice crackled. The only thing that can warm us, can stop the freezing, is the heat of a true mate bond, the resonance of souls recognizing each other. Tanith shook her head. Then you need to find your actual mate, a real one, not, I don't have one. The words fell between them like stones into deep water. What? Lorcan's smile was bitter. There is no true mate for me. There never was. He laughed, a sound without warmth. The curse ensured that. My bloodline is so tangled with frost magic that we're incompatible with normal wolves. We can't resonate, can't bond. We're soulless, Tanith breathed. He inclined his head. In a manner of speaking. The mark on my wrist? He pulled back his own sleeve, revealing an intricate soul mark that gleamed faintly silver. It's real, but it's frozen, dead, incapable of connecting to anyone. Tanith stared at him, understanding crashing over her. You didn't choose me despite knowing I was a fraud, she said slowly. You chose me because I was a fraud. I chose you because you can't bond either. His gaze held hers, intent and searching. 3 years of selections, hundreds of women with functioning soul marks, each one a reminder of what I can never have. Do you know what it's like to touch someone and feel their mark reaching for yours, and have nothing to offer in return? Tanith did know. She'd avoided touch her entire life for exactly that reason. But you, Lorcan continued, your mark reached for nothing because there was nothing to reach with. For the first time in 3 years, I touched someone and didn't have to feel them recoil when they sensed the void where my soul should be. So you chose me to avoid disappointing another real candidate? I chose you because I need a queen, and I'm dying. His voice hardened. The curse will kill me within a year. My council is demanding an heir. The kingdom needs stability. He leaned forward, the cold intensifying between them. I need someone who can play the role of my mate without expecting anything real from me. Without being hurt when they discover I can't love them, can't bond with them, and can't give them anything but a crown and a frozen corpse within 12 months. The brutal honesty of it stole Tanith's breath. Why would I agree to that? Because the alternative is returning to Lord Morkant. Lorcan's eyes narrowed. Oh yes, I know exactly whose servant you are. I know what he threatened you with. I know he sent you here hoping you'd fail. He tilted his head. Would you like to go back to him? Tanith's entire body rejected the idea. Morkant's cruelty, his threats, the lifetime of servitude and abuse that awaited her. What exactly are you proposing? She asked carefully. A contract. You will publicly be my mate. You will give me an heir, through whatever means necessary since we cannot truly bond. You will play the devoted queen in front of my court. His jaw tightened. In exchange, you will live in luxury. You will be protected. And when I die, you will be regent until our child comes of age. And the truth? That we're both frauds? Will remain between us. Lorcan extended his frozen hand, palm up. I will not pretend to love you. I cannot give you affection or intimacy beyond what is required. I will not share your bed except when necessary for conception. His voice was clinical, detached. But I will keep you safe, give you power, and never ask you to be anything other than what you are, a soulless woman surviving in a world that was never built for us. His offer was cold, brutal, transactional, and yet it was more than anyone had ever offered Tanith in her entire life. If I refuse, then I'll have the guards return you to Morkant and find another way to solve my problem. He shrugged. But you won't refuse. You're very confident. I'm observant. His pale eyes seemed to see straight through her. You've been surviving alone your entire life. You've never had anyone in your corner. Anyone who understood what it meant to be hollow in a world that demands you be full. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. Neither have I. Tanith looked at his outstretched hand, at the frost creeping up his wrist, at the death slowly claiming him from the inside out. Cold over cruelty, she thought. I'll choose cold over cruelty every time. She placed her fingers in his. The ice burned against her skin, so cold it stole her breath. But she didn't pull away. I accept your terms. Lorcan's fingers closed around hers. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his frozen eyes. Relief? Gratitude? It was gone before she could name it. Good, he said. Then let me tell you the real reason I chose you. Tanith's breath caught. I thought you just explained. I explained what I want the arrangement to be. He leaned closer, and the cold intensified until she could barely feel her own hand. But that's not why I took your wrist in that hall and refused to let go. She waited, not breathing. When I touched you, Lorcan murmured, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, something happened that has never happened before in 3 years of selections. Nothing happened. There was no resonance. Exactly. His grip tightened. Nothing happened. No reaching. No recoiling. No pain of rejection. Just silence. His eyes searched hers. Do you understand what that means? Tanith shook her head. My frost didn't grow when I touched you. For the first time since the curse woke in my blood, touching another person didn't make me colder. His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she realized with shock that where his skin pressed against hers, there was no ice forming. You don't make me colder, Tanith. She stared at him. That's not the name I gave you. I know who you are. I had Morkant's household investigated months ago when I first heard rumors of his soulless servant. His smile was sharp and secret. I've been waiting for you. Before Tanith could respond, the carriage lurched to a stop. We've arrived, Lorcan said, releasing her hand and straightening. The mask of cold indifference slid back over his features. Welcome to your new home, my queen. But as he turned away, Tanith caught the faintest tremor in his frozen hands. He'd said he couldn't love her, that he wouldn't pretend. But a crack had just appeared between them, something neither of them expected. And Tanith wasn't sure either of them would survive it. The Palace of Valdrin was a fortress of black stone and silver spires, rising from the mountainside like a crown of ice. Tanith followed Lorcan through corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity, her borrowed gown whispering against floors of polished obsidian. Servants bowed as they passed, their faces carefully blank. Courtiers lingered in doorways, their whispers following Tanith like trailing shadows. That's her? The one he finally chose? She looks so plain. Why her? Perhaps she's powerful. Perhaps her soul mark. Did you see how he looked at her in the carriage? He never looks at anyone. Tanith kept her eyes forward, her hands clasped, and her expression neutral. She'd spent a lifetime being invisible. Being watched, being seen, was a different kind of torture. They stopped before a massive door carved with wolves and winter roses. These will be your chambers, Lorcan said, adjacent to mine, as is customary for the king's mate. The servants assigned to you have been carefully selected. Selected how? None of them will be able to see your wrist. He pushed the door open, revealing a suite so vast and luxurious that Tanith's breath caught. The maids are all touch-averse. The guards stationed outside are under strict orders never to enter, and anyone who attends you directly will do so in dim lighting. Tanith stepped inside, turning slowly to take in the canopied bed draped in silver silk, the fireplace already blazing against the cold, the windows overlooking a frozen garden below. You've thought of everything, she said quietly. I've had years to plan for a mate I never expected to find. Lorcan remained in the doorway, his presence somehow filling the space despite the distance between them. The wedding will be in 3 days. Until then, you'll remain here, Seamstresses will attend you tomorrow to prepare your gown. And after the wedding? His expression flickered. After the wedding, we'll discuss the terms of producing an heir. The clinical way he said it made Tanith's skin prickle. But what had she expected? Romance? From a man who'd explicitly told her he couldn't love? I'll leave you to rest, Lorcan said, already turning away. Wait. He paused, not quite looking back. Tanith crossed the room until she stood just behind him. This close, she could see the frost patterns spreading across the back of his neck, climbing toward his hairline. The curse was visible even beneath his clothing, tracing blue veins across every inch of exposed skin. How long? She asked softly. Truly. Lorcan was silent for a long moment. 8 months, he finally said. Perhaps less. The frost reaches my heart by winter's end. He turned his head just enough that she could see his profile, the sharp beauty of his features rendered somehow tragic by the death sentence he carried. Does that change your decision? No. Then why ask? Because I wanted to know if you're afraid, she thought. Because I wanted to see if anything human exists beneath all that ice. Because if we're going to pretend to be mates, she said instead, I should know what I'm pretending toward. His posture eased, just slightly. Rest well, Tanith. He said her name differently this time, less clinical, almost gentle. Tomorrow begins the performance of our lives. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet snap that echoed through the enormous chamber. Tanith stood alone in a room fit for a queen, wearing another woman's identity, contracted to a dying king who had chosen her precisely because she was as broken as he was. She should feel afraid, trapped, desperate. Instead, for the first time in her life, she felt something unexpected. Possibility. The next morning, Tanith woke to chaos. Seamstresses invaded her chambers before dawn, armed with measuring tapes and fabric swatches and an endless barrage of questions about preferences she'd never had the luxury of forming. Did she prefer silver or pearl? Lace or embroidery? A train of 6 feet or 12? Whatever is customary, Tanith said repeatedly, overwhelmed by choices she'd never imagined making. By midday, she'd been measured, pinned, prodded, and wrapped in so many layers of silk that she felt like a doll being dressed for display. The king wishes to see you, a servant announced from the doorway. The seamstresses scattered like startled birds, gathering their supplies and fleeing as though Lorcan himself might freeze them solid if they lingered. Tanith smoothed her borrowed dress, one of the dozens that had mysteriously appeared in her wardrobe overnight, and followed the servant through the palace corridors. They didn't go to a throne room or council chamber as she'd expected. Instead, the servant led her to a small private garden enclosed by walls of black stone. Snow covered the ground in a pristine blanket, and winter roses bloomed in defiance of the cold, their petals tinged with frost but still vibrantly red. Lorcan stood at the center of the garden, his back to her, his silver hair catching the pale winter light. Leave us, he said without turning. The servant bowed and disappeared. Tanith approached slowly, her footsteps crunching in the snow. You summoned me? I need to show you something. Lorcan finally turned and Tanith's breath caught. In daylight, the curse was worse than she'd realized. The frost had spread further overnight, climbing up his neck to trace delicate patterns along his jawline. His lips were faintly blue. His eyes, already pale, seemed almost white in the winter sun. You're dying faster than you said, Tanith breathed. Yes. No denial, no evasion, just blunt acknowledgement. Which is why I need you to understand what you've agreed to before it's too late to change your mind. He lifted his right hand, palm up. At first, Tanith saw nothing unusual. Then the air around his fingers began to shimmer, and frost crystallized out of nothing, spiraling upward from his palm in intricate patterns. The ice took shape, a perfect rose, every petal distinct, every thorn razor-sharp. The curse gives as much as it takes, Lorcan said. I can create ice from nothing. Control cold with a thought. In battle, I'm nearly unstoppable. He closed his fist, and the rose shattered into glittering dust. But every time I use the power, the frost inside me grows. And every time I touch another person, he stepped closer, his frozen hand reaching toward her face. Tanith didn't flinch, didn't retreat. His fingertips brushed her cheek, and she gasped at the searing cold. But she held still, watching him. The curse tries to spread, he finished quietly. His hand lingered against her skin, trembling almost imperceptibly. Every other woman I've touched, I've felt the frost trying to jump to them, trying to claim them too. His jaw tightened. But you, I don't feel anything spreading, Tanith said. And it was true. His touch was cold, brutally cold. But there was no reaching sensation, no creeping invasion. Because you're hollow, Lorcan murmured. The curse can't take root in someone with no bond to anchor it. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, almost tender despite the chill. You're immune to me, Tanith. Immune to the very thing that's killing me. Is that why you really chose me? Because I can't be hurt by your curse? His hand dropped, partially. He stepped back, and the distance between them seemed to widen far beyond the physical space. I've frozen 3 of my previous guards by accident, killed a servant who touched me while I was sleeping. Everyone in this palace keeps their distance because proximity to me is deadly. His voice was flat, controlled, but Tanith heard the isolation beneath it. The loneliness of a man who had become untouchable in every sense. But you can touch me, she said slowly, without hurting me. Yes? And I can touch you without being frozen. Yes. Tanith considered this. The contract he'd offered was transactional, airs and appearances and political necessity. But this was something else. When was the last time someone touched you without gloves, without barriers? Lorcan went very still. My mother, he said finally, when I was 12, before the curse fully woke. He laughed, the sound hollow and cold as wind through empty halls. 14 years ago, 14 years without human contact, 14 years of cold and isolation and the slow certainty of death. Tanith understood then why he'd truly chosen her. Not just because she couldn't bond, not just because she was immune to his curse, because she was the first person in 14 years who could touch him without dying. She crossed the distance between them before she could think better of it. Lorcan tensed, his eyes widening as she reached for him, and took his frozen hand in both of hers. The cold burned. Her fingers immediately began to ache. But she held on, watching his face, watching the shock and something deeper, something raw and vulnerable, flash across his frozen features. What are you doing? His voice was hoarse. Something someone should have done a long time ago. She squeezed his hand gently. You're dying, Your Majesty, and you've spent 14 years not being touched. Whatever this arrangement is between us, contract, performance, survival, I think we can both agree that facing death alone is cruel. His hand trembled in hers. I told you I can't love you. I know. I told you I wouldn't pretend. I know that too. Then why are you holding my hand? Tanith looked up at him, this beautiful, broken, dying king who had chosen her because she was the only person in the world who couldn't be harmed by what he was. Because your curse can't claim me, she said simply. And I think that means more to you than you're willing to admit. Something cracked behind Lorcan's frozen eyes, a fracture in the wall he'd built around himself. For a long moment he just stared at her. Then his fingers slowly, hesitantly, curled around hers in return. The wedding is in 2 days, he said quietly. After that, everything changes. I know. You should be afraid of what comes next. Tanith thought of Lord Morcant, of Bryony's stolen identity, of all the lies she was standing upon. She thought of the curse eating Lorcan from the inside out, of the heir they would need to produce, of the performance they would need to maintain until his death. "I've been afraid my entire life," she said. "I'm tired of it." Lorcan's grip tightened, just slightly, and standing there in the frozen garden, holding the hand of a dying king, Tanith felt something she hadn't felt since childhood. Warmth, just the faintest ember, buried deep in her hollow chest. But it was there, and when she met Lorcan's eyes, she saw the same spark reflected in his frozen gaze. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them pulled away. The Cathedral of Valdrin had been carved from a single glacier. That was the legend, at least. Looking at it now, Tanith could almost believe it. The walls shimmered with an internal blue light, and the ceiling arched so high above that it disappeared into shadow. Massive pillars of translucent ice supported the structure, and the altar at the far end was a throne of frozen crystal. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was exactly where a frost-cursed king would wed his fraudulent mate. Tanith stood at the entrance, her wedding gown a cascade of white silk and silver embroidery that weighed more than she did. The seamstresses had outdone themselves. She looked like a queen. She felt like a sacrifice. The cathedral was packed with nobility, every seat filled with wolves who had come to witness their king finally take a mate. Whispers rustled through the crowd like wind through dead leaves. "She's lovely, but who is she really? Morcant's daughter? I've never heard of her before. Look at the king. He's worse than last month. The frost is nearly to his eyes." Tanith began the long walk toward the altar. Every step felt like walking toward her own execution. The weight of hundreds of stairs pressed against her, curious and suspicious and hungry for drama. Somewhere in this crowd, Lord Morcant was watching, waiting to see if his gambit would pay off. And at the end of the aisle, Lorcan waited. He wore black, as always. His coat was trimmed with silver fur, his hair pulled back to reveal the sharp angles of his face. The frost had spread further since she'd seen him in the garden. It traced delicate patterns across his temples now, climbing toward his eyes like reaching fingers. But when his gaze met hers, something warm flickered in his expression. She reached the altar. Lorcan extended his hand, and Tanith took it without hesitation. The cold no longer shocked her. She was learning to expect it, to breathe through it, to find something almost comforting in the familiar burn. The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing off the ice walls in sonorous waves. Tanith barely heard the words. She was too aware of Lorcan's frozen fingers wrapped around hers, of the slight tremor in his grip, of the way he kept glancing at her as if still surprised she was there. "Do you, Lorcan, Alpha King of Valdrin, take this woman as your mate, your queen, your bonded soul?" "I do." His voice carried through the cathedral, cold and clear. The priest turned to her. "And do you, Bryony?" Tanith's stomach clenched at the false name. "Daughter of House Morcant, take this man as your mate, your king, your bonded soul?" She thought of the real Bryony, fled with her soldier, free and far away. She thought of the soulless servant who had taken her place. She thought of all the lies stacked beneath her feet like kindling waiting for a spark. "I do." The priest smiled. "Then let the resonance confirm what words have declared." This was the moment, the exposure, the death. Lorcan raised their joined hands. The cathedral fell silent, every breath held, every eye fixed on their wrists where soul marks should ignite with the fire of true bonding. Tanith's false mark remained dark. Lorcan's frozen mark remained silver and still. Nothing happened. The silence stretched, confused and uncertain. Whispers began to rise. "No resonance? But that's unthinkable for true mates. Perhaps the curse interferes. Look at their hands. They're still holding on. Lorcan's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. A warning. A reassurance. Tanith couldn't tell which. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through silk. The curse that claims my life has frozen my soul mark. It cannot resonate as normal bonds do. He raised their joined hands higher. But I have touched every candidate in 3 years of selections, and not one has been able to hold my hand without pain. Not one has been able to withstand the cold that kills everything I touch. He turned to face the crowd, pulling Tanith closer. This woman can. This woman does. And that is confirmation enough. The priest hesitated, clearly uncertain. But who would argue with the Alpha King? Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you bonded. Mates in the eyes of the kingdom and the gods. Lorcan turned to face her. The crowd waited for the traditional kiss. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, the same gesture she'd seen him make in the garden. His mouth pressed against her knuckles, cold as winter wind, gentle as falling snow. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin, soft enough that only she could hear. Tanith's breath caught. The cathedral erupted in applause, relief, and celebration mixing in equal measure. The king had finally taken a mate. The kingdom had its queen. Perhaps the curse could still be broken, if only they knew the truth. Lorcan released her hand but offered his arm instead. Together, they walked back down the aisle, through the cheering crowds, toward the carriage waiting to take them to the palace. Toward the wedding night. Toward everything that came next. As they stepped into the winter air, Tanith caught Lord Morcant's gaze from the crowd. His smile was sharp and satisfied. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was really happening. Neither, Tanith realized with sudden clarity, did she. The wedding chambers were warm. That was Tanith's first thought as she stepped inside. How strange it was to enter a room in this frozen palace and feel actual warmth. A fire blazed in the massive hearth, piled high with logs. Candles burned on every surface, their flames flickering against walls draped in deep red fabric. Someone had prepared this room specifically to fight the cold. Lorcan entered behind her, and the temperature immediately dropped several degrees. The candles flickered harder. The fire seemed to shrink. "The servants try," he said, noting her gaze on the flames. "But my presence tends to overwhelm their efforts." Tanith turned to face him. In the candlelight, the frost on his skin glittered like diamonds scattered across marble, beautiful and deadly. "What happens now?" she asked. Lorcan closed the door with a soft click. "Now we discuss terms." "Terms?" "You agreed to give me an heir." He crossed to a small table where wine had been laid out, pouring 2 glasses with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "I want to be clear about what that will require." Tanith accepted the wine he offered, grateful for something to hold. "I assumed it would require the obvious." "It will." He didn't look at her. "But I need you to understand something first." "What?" Lorcan set down his glass without drinking. For a long moment he simply stood there, staring into the fire. "I've never been with anyone," he said finally. "In 14 years of isolation, I've never—" He stopped, jaw tight. The curse makes intimacy beyond reason. Even a prolonged touch can freeze someone from the inside out. The few times I tried, in my youth, before I understood the danger. His voice went flat. I hurt people. Badly. Tanith's chest tightened. "But I'm immune." "You're immune to the spreading curse, yes. But you're not immune to cold." He turned to face her, and she saw the fear he was trying to hide behind his frozen expression. "My body temperature drops during heightened emotional states. Intimacy would be— I don't know what it would be. I've never been able to find out." Understanding crashed over her. He wasn't just warning her about the physical danger. He was confessing that he didn't know how to do this. That he'd spent 14 years untouched, unkissed, unknown, just like her. I've never been with anyone either, Tanith said quietly. Lorcan's eyes widened slightly. The soulless aren't exactly sought after for romance. She managed a wry smile. I've spent my life hiding what I am. That doesn't leave much room for intimacy. The distance felt smaller suddenly, bridged by their shared inexperience, their shared isolation. We're both starting from nothing, Lorcan murmured. That seems fitting. It does. He crossed the space between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. She didn't. When he stood before her, close enough that she could see the frost patterns on his eyelashes, he raised one trembling hand to her face. Tell me if it's too cold. His palm settled against her cheek. The chill burned, but Tanith breathed through it, holding his gaze. It's bearable. You're lying. I'm enduring. She covered his hand with her own, pressing it closer. There's a difference. Something cracked in his expression. That same fracture she'd seen in the garden, widening now. Why? His voice was barely a whisper. Why are you kind to me? Because you've been kind to me. Tanith stepped closer, eliminating the last distance between them. You could have exposed me, killed me, sent me back to Morkant. Instead, you offered me protection. A crown. A future. I offered you a transaction. You offered me more than anyone else ever has. Lorcan's breath caught. His hand trembled against her cheek. Tanith. Whatever this is, she said softly. Whatever we're doing, I don't want to pretend we're enemies. We're both soulless. Both alone. Both surviving. She turned her face slightly to press her lips against his frozen palm. Let's survive together. The kiss was barely anything, just her mouth brushing his skin. But Lorcan shuddered as though she'd struck him. You shouldn't want this, he rasped. Shouldn't want me. Probably not. She looked up at him through her lashes. But I'm tired of shouldn't. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then Lorcan's hands cupped her face, both hands now, frozen palms against her flushed cheeks, and he kissed her. It was clumsy, uncertain. His lips were cold enough to sting, and neither of them quite knew what they were doing, but it was also gentle in a way Tanith hadn't expected. Careful, as though she were something precious and he was terrified of breaking her. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide with wonder. Did that hurt? He asked urgently. A little? She smiled. I don't care. He kissed her again. And again. By the time they made it to the bed, Tanith had stopped feeling the cold entirely. There was only warmth. Astonishing, inexplicable warmth blooming between them where their bodies touched. Later, much later, tangled together in blankets that had frozen stiff at the edges, Tanith felt Lorcan's arm tighten around her waist. Stay, he murmured against her hair. Please. She hadn't planned to leave. She hadn't planned any of this. But lying there in the arms of a man who had never been held, who had never been wanted, who had never expected kindness and didn't know what to do with it now that he'd received it. Tanith realized something terrifying. She wasn't pretending anymore. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Tanith had ever experienced. Lorcan came to her chambers every evening. At first he claimed it was necessity. They needed to conceive an heir, after all. But necessity didn't explain why he lingered afterward, talking about his day. Necessity didn't explain the books he brought her from the palace library, chosen specifically based on interests she'd mentioned in passing. Necessity didn't explain the way he began arriving earlier each night, sometimes before dinner, just to sit with her by the fire. The council meeting ran long, he said one evening, slumping into the chair across from her with uncharacteristic exhaustion. Lord Ashworth questioned the trade agreements for 3 hours. Tanith set down her embroidery, a skill she was still learning, her stitches uneven but improving. What did you do? Froze his wine goblet to his hand. Lorcan's lips twitched. Accidentally. Tanith laughed, the sound bright and surprised, and Lorcan's expression transformed into something softer, something almost wondering. I like that sound, he said quietly. What sound? Your laugh. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, studying her. I don't think I'd ever heard you laugh before this week. I don't think I had much to laugh about before this week. Neither did I. The fire crackled between them. Outside, winter raged, but inside this room, with him, Tanith felt warmer than she had in her entire life. It was becoming a problem. The arrangement was supposed to be transactional, a contract, performance and survival. But somewhere between the wedding night and now, the lines had blurred beyond recognition. Lorcan sought her opinion on matters of state, genuinely listening to her answers. He defended her against courtiers who questioned her sudden appearance in their king's life. He reached for her hand in public, not for show, but as though he needed the contact as much as she did. And in private, he was different. The cold king thawed when they were alone. He smiled, actual smiles that reached his eyes. He told her about his childhood, about his mother who had died when he was 15, about the father who had frozen to death before Lorcan turned 20. He told her about the loneliness that had shaped his entire existence, and Tanith told him about her own, about being soulless, about the servants' quarters and the scraps and the hiding, about the mother she'd never known who had given her up to protect her. They exchanged their broken pieces like gifts, like trust, like something dangerously close to love. You're warmer than you were, Tanith observed one night, her palm pressed against his chest. The frost had stopped spreading. If anything, it seemed to be retreating. His heartbeat beneath her hand was steady and strong. I've noticed. Lorcan covered her hand with his own. The healers can't explain it. Maybe it's the... Don't say it. His voice was suddenly sharp. Don't. Tanith went still. Don't say what? What you're thinking. He pulled away, sitting up in bed, his back to her. What you've been thinking for weeks. Lorcan, this isn't real. His voice cracked. It can't be real. I told you from the beginning that that you couldn't love me. I remember. Then why do you look at me like that? He spun to face her, and she saw the anguish in his frozen eyes. Why do you touch me like you mean it? Why do you make me feel things I swore I would never feel? Tanith's blood was racing. Lorcan, what are you saying? I'm saying that this was supposed to be a transaction. He stood pacing, frost spiraling out from his bare feet with every step. I chose you because you couldn't bond with me, because being with you was supposed to be safe, because I could have a queen, an heir, a partner, without any risk of... He stopped mid-sentence, mid-step. Without any risk of what? Tanith asked softly. Lorcan stood with his back to her, shoulders heaving, of wanting to keep you. The confession hung in the air between them. Tanith rose from the bed, wrapping a sheet around herself, and crossed to stand behind him. Slowly, carefully, she pressed her palm to the center of his back. He flinched but didn't pull away. What if I wanted to be kept? She whispered. Then you'd be a fool. His voice was hoarse. I'm dying, Tanith. The curse is retreating. You said so yourself. The healers can't explain it, but I can. She stepped around to face him, forcing him to meet her eyes. You've spent 14 years untouched, unloved, convinced that no one could ever warm the frost inside you, and now someone can. Now I can. Because you're immune to the curse? Or because I'm something else entirely? She took his face in her hands, both palms against his frozen cheeks, and held him there, forcing him to see her. Lorcan, I've watched you these past weeks. You've stopped freezing everything you touch. You've stopped getting worse. Something is changing, and it started the moment you stopped treating this like a transaction. His eyes were wild with fear and hope, and something deeper. Tanith, if you're wrong, then nothing changes. The curse kills you. I become regent for our child. She stroked her thumbs across his cheekbones. But if I'm right, I can't. He choked out. I can't let myself believe. If I let myself hope and I'm wrong, tell me you don't feel it. She leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his. Tell me you don't feel something between us that has nothing to do with contracts or heirs or survival. Lorcan was trembling. His hands came up to grip her wrists, not pulling her away, just holding on. I feel it, he whispered. God's help me. I feel it. But I don't know what it is. Neither do I. Tanith smiled through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. But I'd like to find out. If you would. For a long, suspended moment, he simply stared at her. Then his hands slid from her wrists to her waist, pulling her against him, and he kissed her with a desperation that stole her breath. This kiss was different from all the others. This one held nothing back. And when it ended, when they pulled apart just enough to breathe, Tanith saw the frost on his cheeks beginning to melt. Tanith, he said, his voice raw. I think I'm falling. The door burst open. Lord Morcant strode in, flanked by 2 palace guards, his expression twisted with triumph. I hate to interrupt this touching scene, he drawled, but I'm afraid the charade is over. Lorcan spun, shoving Tanith behind him, ice already forming around his fists. How dare you enter? How dare I? Morcant laughed. I dare, your majesty, because your precious queen is a fraud, an impostor, a soulless servant who murdered my daughter and stole her identity. Tanith's blood ran cold. Guards! Lorcan snarled. Arrest this man for what? For telling the truth? Morcant pulled something from his coat, a rolled document bearing an official seal. I have witness testimony. I have proof of the tattoo. I have everything I need to have your mate burned at the stake for impersonation and murder. His smile widened. Unless, of course, His Majesty would like to discuss alternative arrangements. Tanith stepped forward, her legs shaking. Lorcan, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything. Lorcan cut her off. He turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her stomach drop. Not shock, not betrayal, not even anger. Just terrible, terrible resignation. I know who you are, he said quietly. I've always known. Now it was Morcant's turn to look shocked. What? Lorcan turned back to face the nobleman, and when he spoke, his voice was ice itself. You think I didn't investigate every candidate before the selection? You think I didn't know exactly who Tanith was before I chose her? He took a step toward Morcant, frost spreading across the floor with every footfall. I know she's soulless. I know the mark is fake. I know your real daughter fled with a soldier, and that you sent your servant in her place to avoid the shame. Morcant's face had gone pale. Then why? Because I am also soulless, you fool. Lorcan's voice rang through the chamber. Because the curse that is killing me has frozen any capacity for bonding, and I chose the one woman in your pathetic selection who couldn't be hurt by that. But the resonance... There was no resonance because neither of us can resonate. Lorcan was still advancing, and Morcant was retreating, the triumph draining from his face. And your blackmail means nothing because I never required her to be legitimate. I required her to be immune. Morcant hit the wall. The guards he'd brought had backed away, clearly unwilling to stand between their king and his prey. As for your claims of murder, Lorcan continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, I've had my own investigators looking into your daughter's disappearance. They found her very much alive in a village 3 kingdoms away, happily married to her soldier. Tanith gasped. There was no murder, Lorcan said. Just a father so obsessed with his own reputation that he was willing to sacrifice an innocent servant to cover his shame. Morcant's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. You will leave this palace, Lorcan said. You will return to your estate and stay there. And if you ever threaten my queen again, my true queen, who is worth 1,000 of your legitimate daughter, I will freeze the blood in your veins so slowly that you'll feel every crystal forming." He stepped back. "Guards, escort Lord Morcant out, and inform the council that any future correspondence from House Morcant should be directed to the incinerator." The guards seized Morcant's arms and dragged him toward the door. His sputtering protests echoed down the corridor. Then they were alone. Tanith couldn't move, could barely breathe. "You knew," she said finally. "This whole time. You knew everything." Lorcan turned to face her. The ice around his fists was melting. The frost on the floor was beginning to recede. "I knew," he confirmed. "And you still chose me, still married me, still fell in love with you?" His voice cracked on the word. "Yes, apparently so." Tanith crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and threw herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt the last of his resistance crumble. "I love you," she whispered against his neck. "I know I shouldn't. I know this wasn't the arrangement. But I love you, Lorcan." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he said, his voice breaking. "I've loved you for weeks. I've been terrified to admit it because—" He stopped. His whole body went rigid. "Lorcan." Tanith pulled back, alarmed. "What's wrong?" He was staring at his hands, at his wrists, at the frost that was suddenly spreading faster than she'd ever seen it move, racing up his arms toward his chest. "No," he breathed. "No, not now. What's happening?" He looked at her with eyes full of love and terror. "The curse!" he gasped. I told you I couldn't." His hand flew to his chest, his face contorted with pain. "If the King of Valdren ever truly falls in love," he choked out, "the frost claims his heart." And then he collapsed in her arms. "Help! Someone help me!" Tanith's screams echoed through the palace corridors as she cradled Lorcan's convulsing body. Frost was spreading across his chest so quickly she could watch it grow, blue-white crystals forming intricate patterns over his heart. Guards burst through the door. Servants followed. Within moments, the chamber was filled with panicked voices and rushing footsteps. "The king! Fetch the healers! What happened to him?" "Don't touch him!" Tanith screamed as a guard reached toward Lorcan. "The frost will spread to you." They carried him on a stretcher of thick furs, Tanith running alongside, her hand gripping his frozen fingers. His skin was colder than she'd ever felt it. Cold beyond cold, the kind of temperature that burned worse than fire. "Stay with me," she begged. "Lorcan, please, stay with me." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. "Shouldn't have said it," he gasped. "Shouldn't have let myself—" "Don't talk. Save your strength." "No strength. Left." His hand twitched in hers. "Tanith, I'm sorry. I knew. The risk. I just couldn't stop. We'll find a way to fix this. There has to be a way." "There isn't." His voice was fading. 14 generations. Tried. The curse cannot be broken." They reached the king's chambers. The healers were already there. Ancient wolves with grim expressions who took one look at Lorcan and shook their heads. "The frost has reached his heart," the eldest said quietly. "We can slow it, perhaps. Give him hours instead of minutes. But there is no reversing this." "No." Tanith's voice shook. "No, I refuse to accept that. There has to be something." "My queen." The healer's eyes were kind, but firm. "The curse was designed specifically to prevent this outcome. Any king who falls in love forfeits his life. That has been the law of Valdren for over 300 years. Then it's a terrible law and it needs to be broken." "It cannot be broken. Not by healers. Not by magic. Not by—" "Who created it?" The healer paused. "What?" The curse. Tanith stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Someone created it. Some witch. Some sorcerer. Some magical being. Who? The Winter Witch, the healer said slowly. A powerful sorceress who lived in the mountains centuries ago, but she's long dead. Are you certain? The healer exchanged glances with his colleagues. My queen, even if she lived, why would she help? She created the curse in the first place. Because curses have rules. Tanith's mind was racing, pieces clicking together. Every curse has conditions, loopholes, ways to be broken that the creator built in, intentionally or not. The only condition we know of is that the king must never love. That's the trigger, not the solution. Tanith spun toward the door. Keep him alive. Hours, you said. Give me hours. My queen, where are you going? To find someone who knows more about this curse than you do. She was halfway down the corridor when a voice stopped her. You won't find her in the mountains. Tanith turned. An old woman stood in the shadows of an alcove, her face weathered and worn, and her eyes sharp as winter stars. She wore the simple clothes of a palace servant, but there was something about her presence that made Tanith's wolf, small and stunted as it was, stand at attention. Who are you? Someone who has been waiting a very long time for this moment. The woman stepped forward, and Tanith saw the mark on her wrist, a soul mark, but unlike any she'd ever seen. It shimmered with silver light, constantly shifting, never quite settling into a fixed pattern. You know about the curse, Tanith said. It wasn't a question. I should. The woman's smile was sad and ancient. I helped create it. Tanith's blood ran cold. You're the Winter Witch. No, I was her apprentice, her sister in magic, if not in blood. The woman moved closer, studying Tanith's face with unnerving intensity. My name is Seraphel, and I've been watching you since you arrived at this palace. Tanith of no house, Tanith of no soul, Tanith who loves without bonds. If you know how to break the curse, tell me. Please. He's dying. I know. Seraphel's eyes glistened. And I know why you can save him when no one else could. Then tell me. Seraphel took Tanith's hands in her own. Her grip was warm, shockingly warm after so many weeks of Lorcan's cold. The curse was never meant to last forever, she said quietly. My sister was brilliant but cruel. She designed it as the cruelest trap. The kings need love to survive, yet love itself kills them. A perfect prison with no key. Tanith's chest constricted with despair. But I convinced her to leave a doorway, Seraphel continued. One single path to salvation that she thought would never be walked. What path? The curse feeds on the bond between mates. Seraphel's grip tightened. It uses the soulmark connection to anchor itself, to spread, to kill. That's why every king who has loved has died, because their love activated the bond, and the bond fed the curse. Tanith's pulse was racing. But I don't have a bond. I'm soulless. Exactly. Seraphel's smile widened. You love him freely, by choice, without any magical connection forcing you toward him. Your love isn't anchored in souls or marks or destiny. Her eyes burned into Tanith's. Your love is pure. How does that help him? Because pure love, chosen love, can't feed the curse. It can only starve it. Tanith stared at her. What do I need to do? Seraphel released her hands and reached into her robes, pulling out a small vial filled with liquid silver. This is essence of winter, she said, distilled from the heart of the original curse. If you drink it, the frost inside Lorcan will recognize you as its new host. It will try to spread to you instead. And kill me instead of him. If you were bonded, yes, the curse would devour your soul through the soulmark connection. Seraphel pressed the vial into Tanith's palm. But you have no soul for it to devour, no mark for it to anchor. You're hollow, child. empty. The curse will enter you and find nothing to consume. It will die inside you like a flame without air. Tanith looked at the vial, at the swirling silver liquid that could save the man she loved. You said the witch thought this path would never be walked, she said slowly. Why? Seraphel's expression softened. Because she believed no soulless person could ever truly love, that without the capacity for bonding, love was unattainable. Her hand cupped Tanith's cheek. She underestimated the human heart, child, as so many powerful beings do. Will it hurt? I don't know. No one has ever tried this before. Tanith closed her fingers around the vial. Take me to him. Lorcan's chambers were silent except for the crackling of ice. The frost had spread beyond his body now, crawling across the bed, up the walls, across the ceiling. The candles had all guttered out. The fire had died. The room was a frozen tomb, and at its center lay the king, still as death, his skin so pale it was nearly translucent. Tanith knelt beside the bed, the vial clutched in her hand. Seraphel stood in the doorway watching. If this doesn't work, Tanith said quietly, will he die in pain? The frost will take him gently. He'll simply stop. And if it does work, then the curse ends. For him, for all future kings of Valdrin, forever. Tanith looked at Lorcan's frozen face. At the man who had chosen her when no one else would, who had protected her, defended her, and fallen in love with her despite every wall he'd built. I never thanked you, she whispered to him, for seeing me, for choosing me, for showing me that being hollow didn't mean being worthless. She uncorked the vial. I love you, Lorcan. Not because I was meant to, not because some mark on my wrist told me to, but because you earned it, because you're kind beneath all that cold, because you made me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life. She lifted the vial to her lips. So I choose you. Freely. Completely. With everything I don't have. And she drank. The cold hit her like a wall of ice. Every nerve in her body screamed as the liquid silver spread through her veins, freezing her from the inside out. She collapsed forward, catching herself on the edge of the bed, gasping for air that seemed to crystallize in her lungs. It hurt. Gods. It hurt worse than anything she'd ever imagined. But beneath the pain, she felt something else. The curse. Searching. It moved through her like a living thing, probing, reaching, and looking for the bond it was designed to consume. It brushed against her soul mark, the false one, the tattoo, and found nothing. It pushed deeper, hunting for the connection that should exist between her and Lorcan, and found nothing. No bond, no mark, no anchor. Tanith felt the curse's confusion, its hunger turning to desperation. It was starving, dying, thrashing inside her hollow chest like a beast trapped in an empty cage. She held on. Through the pain, through the cold, through the feeling of ice forming in her blood, she held on. And then, slowly, miraculously, she felt it begin to die. The frost receded. The cold faded. The curse that had plagued the kings of Valdrin for 300 years dissolved inside her like snow in sunlight. Tanith slumped against the bed, too weak to move, barely able to breathe, but alive, still alive, and warm. For the first time since she'd entered this frozen palace, Tanith felt truly, completely warm. Lorcan, she managed. No response. Lorcan, please. She dragged herself up, reaching for his face. His skin was still cold, but not frozen, not deadly, just cold. And then, beneath her palm, she felt his heartbeat, strong, steady, alive. His eyes opened. For a moment, he simply stared at her, confusion and wonder warring in his expression. Tanith? His voice was rough, broken. What? What happened? I felt the frost reach my heart. I felt myself dying. The curse is gone. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. It's gone, Lorcan. Forever. He sat up slowly, looking at his hands, at his arms, at the skin that was no longer traced with frost patterns. How? He breathed. Because I loved you without a bond? Tanith laughed through her tears. Because I'm hollow, and the curse needed a soul to devour, and I didn't have one to give. Lorcan stared at her. Then his arms were around her, pulling her against him, and she felt something extraordinary. Warmth. His body was warm. Not hot, not feverish, but genuinely, beautifully, perfectly warm. You saved me, he whispered against her hair. You remarkable, wonderful, stubborn woman. You saved me. You saved me first. She pulled back to look at him, to see him without the frost, without the curse, without the shadow of death hanging over him. You chose me when everyone else threw me away. I would choose you 1,000 times over. His hands cupped her face, and for the first time his touch didn't burn. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. He kissed her, and this kiss was different from all the others. This kiss was warmth and hope, and the beginning of forever. 6 months later, spring had come to Valdrin. For the first time in 3 centuries, flowers bloomed in the palace gardens. The eternal winter that had gripped the kingdom had begun to thaw the moment the curse broke, and now the mountains themselves seemed to be waking from a long sleep. Tanith stood in the garden where Lorcan had first shown her his powers, watching winter roses give way to spring blossoms. Her hand rested on the swell of her belly. The council approved the new soulless protection laws. She turned to find Lorcan walking toward her, a stack of documents in his hands and a smile on his face. He looked different now. Still beautiful, still commanding, but warmer in every sense. The cold that had once radiated from him was completely gone. All of them? Tanith asked. Every single one. No more abandonment of soulless children. No more discrimination in employment or marriage. Full citizenship rights. He stopped beside her, his arms sliding around her waist. Seraphel's testimony about the curse helped. Once the court understood that being soulless was what saved the kingdom, opinions shifted rather quickly. Tanith leaned into him. And the investigation into my mother? Complete. Lorcan's voice softened. She was Seraphel's daughter. Your grandmother was the Winter Witch's apprentice, which means I was never truly soulless at all. Tanith touched her wrist, where the fake tattoo had long since been removed. Just dormant, waiting for the right conditions to wake. Seraphel says your magic will fully manifest after the baby is born. She wants to train you herself. She's staying. She says she's tired of hiding in palace alcoves. Lorcan smiled. I offered her the position of royal magical advisor. She accepted, on the condition that she gets to spoil her great-grandchild rotten. Tanith laughed, the sound bright and free in the spring air. So much had changed. Morkant had been stripped of his titles and lands, his crimes exposed to the entire kingdom. Bryony, the real Bryony, had been found and offered a full pardon, though she'd chosen to remain with her soldier husband in their distant village. The alliance between Valdrin and its neighbors had never been stronger, built on the foundation of a curse finally broken. And Tanith, once a soulless servant hiding in the shadows, was now queen of it all. Any regrets? Lorcan asked quietly. Tanith turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had chosen her when no one else would. The man who had offered her cold over cruelty and ended up giving her warmth instead. Only one, she said. His brow furrowed. What? That I didn't meet you sooner. She rose on her toes to kiss him. We could have had so many more years. Lorcan's arms tightened around her. Then we'll make every year we have count. Behind them, the first flowers of spring swayed in a warm breeze. Above them, the sun shone down on a kingdom reborn. And between them, a child grew. A child who would never know the curse, never know the cold, never know what it meant to be hollow. A child born of chosen love. Tanith smiled against Lorcan's lips. She had come to this palace pretending to be something she wasn't. She was leaving as something she never dreamed she could be. Whole. The pretense was supposed to save her life. Just play the part, they said. Pretend to be his fated mate. Let him believe the soul mark burns when your skin meets his. And Tanith had agreed, because the alternative was death. She stood before the Alpha King of Valdrin now, her borrowed gown too fine for a servant, her borrowed name bitter on her tongue. The great hall was silent as a crypt. Every noble, every guard, every servant waited to witness the resonance, that sacred moment when true mates touched and their soul marks ignited with shared fire. Tanith's wrist bore only ink, a forgery, a lie. She was soulless, one of the cursed ones born without the ability to bond. In a world where mates were destiny, she was an aberration. And now she had to fake the one thing her body could never produce. Alpha King Lorcan stood before her, devastatingly beautiful and terrifyingly still. Silver hair fell across eyes the color of frozen storm clouds. They said he had executed the last woman who tried to deceive him. They said he could smell lies the way wolves smelled blood. His hand extended toward her. This was the moment, the exposure, the death. Tanith placed her trembling fingers in his. Nothing happened. No light. No warmth. No resonance. She waited for his roar of fury, for guards to seize her, for the executioner's blade. Instead, Lorcan smiled. Slow, knowing, dangerous. Perfect, he murmured, soft enough that only she could hear. You're exactly what I need. That night he stopped pretending, and everything Tanith thought she knew about mates, about bonds, about this cold and terrifying king, shattered completely. Neither of them understood how unbreakable their vow would become. Neither of them knew that pretending was the one thing they'd never have to do again. Thank you for listening to this story. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. I always read them, and they mean more than you know.